Hello, everybody, to another reading of Chop Wood Carry Water. Today we will be reading chapter 9, What Went Well. On one particular tough day of training, John just could not seem to shoot as well as normal. His groupings were loose and unfocused, and he became mentally distracted by the fit of his new shooting guard. As he finished the day in frustration, Akira took him aside and asked him how his day had been. Terrible. I couldn't focus. I got distracted by my new shooting guard, and my groupings weren't as tight as they needed to be. I feel like a failure. Akira smiled and shrugged. I just asked how you shot John, but since you brought it up, what did you do well in training? John paused, thrown off. He struggled to think of a single positive takeaway from the day's shooting. Nothing. I did nothing well, he said, discouraged. I have a very hard time believing that, John, said Akira. Why do you think it is so hard for you to think of what you did well? John shrugged. I guess I don't think about it because I don't want to get a big head. Let me tell you something, John. I do. John looked at his sensei in surprise and confusion as Akira continued. It is much easier for your brain to focus on the negatives, even if they are totally overweight by the positives. Many people's confidence suffers because they are more concerned with appearing to be humble. So they have been conditioned to tell really negative stories about themselves and their performance. Now, they are people who have the reverse challenge and can see their flaws, but far and away, the bigger issue is people who lack confidence and who are highly critical of themselves. But let's be clear, negatively and a nothing I do is good enough attitude is not humility. A much smarter man than I said, humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. Let me tell you a couple of secrets about how marvelous brains actually work, John. Your memory are not created through your experiences. Rather, they are created through your stories you tell yourself and others about those experiences. So, if you leave a practice or a match and you tell everyone how poorly you played and you focus on all your mistakes, then that is what your brain remembers. Most people undermine all the hard work they've been putting in by telling really negative stories and blocking out all the growth that is happening. Akira smiled. What do you mean, blocking out? Said John as his nose scrunched and his eyebrows furrowed inquisitively. Our brains are marvelous machines, John, when they process around 11 million bits of information per second, but we are only aware about 40 of those bits. In other words, what you're only aware of is 0.0000364 of what is actually happening around you. You and I block out 99.99999% of what our brain is processing. So if we want to change the way our brain scans the world and start, oh, hang on, this is so exciting to read this, and it is like, you know, it's beautiful. It's so beautiful. I can't explain what a joy it is for me to read this today with you guys. So let's just go back to the last paragraph. If we want to change the way our brain scans the world and start to adopt more beneficial reality and vantage points, we must start by rewiring the way our brain scans the world around us. Well, that sounds incredibly challenging. How in the world do you do that? Asked John. Akira handed him a small notepad and a pen. By writing it down. John flipped through the blank pages as Akira went on. I want you to do this every shooting session. I want you to start by writing a value statement at the top. It should say, my value comes from who I am and not from what I do. Then follow that with a growth mindset statement. Anything that happens to me today, anything that happens to me today is in my best interest and is an opportunity for me to learn and grow. Then I want you to write out between 15 to 30, 63 specific things you did well. John blinked, taken aback. Whoa, that's a lot. I think that might be impossible. Of course, it feels that way, John. Hang on. Of course, it feels that way. That's because you haven't yet trained your brain to think that way. Do you remember the first time you tried to make a left hand lay up in basketball? Asked Akira. John blushed and mumbled, yes, I was 11 years old and I started to cry. Truthfully, I I started bailing and ran out of the gym. And I thought the guy who was training me was a huge jerk, but he made me keep doing it for months, often through crying and fits of frustration. Sounds like a tough trainer. Did it get easier though? Akira asked. Yes, eventually. I became highly skilled with finishing with my left hand, said John as a smile broke through and things clicked in his mind. In time, this will get easier as you consistently force your brain to scan the world differently. But until then, I encourage you to always keep going until you have at least 15 things. If you decide to quit before 15, make sure you at least get two more than where you quit the day before. Remember, this is rewiring your brain. It is hard work, but it is very worth it, said Akira. One thing that might be helpful is to carry this notebook with you and jot down as you go through practice, your day, or during breaks in competition. You may not need write them all the way to during competition or practice, but write down enough to remember when you complete your journal later in the day. And remember, John, you have ignored what you have done well for a long time, while blowing your flaws out of proportion. So maybe for the next 6 months, let's try and do the reverse. Let's ignore most of the flaws and focus on finding even the smallest thing you did well and how you got better. That's helpful. Actually, I think I can do that, said John. The next part of the journal is writing out only two areas of growth. But if you get to write these down to get 15 specific things you have done well, you only get two areas because it is hard to remember to focus on more than the two at any one time. By writing down only two areas, you can look back at yesterday's journal, know exactly what you need to focus on today's training. Finally, the last thing you write out is at least two things you learned today. Because remember, nothing is a test. Everything is an opportunity to learn. And we need to actually focus on learning. Akira said with a big smile, John, it takes a lot of discipline to stick in with what went well journal, but it is a very rewarding exercise with far-reaching implications for your life. If you can't see it what you do well, it is awful hard to encourage other people with what they do well. John nodded, encouraged to try this new exercise. As soon as he got back to his room, he flipped open the notebook and began writing. When he had finished, his entry looked like this. Word statement. My value comes from who I am not. Sorry, a word statement. My value comes from who I am, not from what I do. Growth mindset. Anything that happens to me today is in my best interest and it is an opportunity for me to learn and grow. What went well? Write out 15 specific things you did well today. Free feel to use examples of these areas as you got better, even if they weren't the very best you were capable of. I kept my stance solid for every shot. I caught myself wondering if I would be able to finish the practice, start to talk to myself instead of listen to myself. Third, I was intentional about treating the other apprentices very well, even if I felt like they didn't deserve it. Fourth, I chose to take deep breaths before I approached the firing line. Five, I heard my core stable and kept clean lines in shooting form. Six, I cleared my mind before each release and remembered to focus on controllables. Seven, I saw Catuso shooting three tight groupings, but I chose not to compare and focus on my own shots. 8. I chose to see myself being very strong even when I felt my shoulders shake on my last set of draws. 9. When I got frustrated and wanted to give up, I reminded myself that I'm building my own house. 10. I started and finished my practice today without anyone forcing me. 11. I kept my breathing slow and focused on the firing line. 12. I remembered to keep visualizing each arrow hitting where I aimed it, even when my shots were off. 13. I remember to pause and settle my mind and breathe before each release. 14. I encouraged the other apprentices by reminding them of what they were doing well. 15. I did a better job today of letting the negative thoughts fly on and not give them power. 16. I kept my releases easy and unconscious, areas for growth, formerly called weaknesses, but we are looking at them as growth opportunities now, keeping my mind clear and focusing on my process even when I'm distracted, staying present after a mistake and focusing on what I need to do now. What I learned. This can be something that you already know, but I learned something the importance of again. I shoot tighter groupings when I remember to release my goals and focus on controllables instead. By focusing on what my fellow apprentices do well, it creates a much better energy and environment for growth and optimum performance. Wow. beautiful book, and I hope that you're enjoying this with me. And for now, we're going to stop the reading, and in the next video, we're going to continue with the next chapter.